I'm Josh. Welcome to Two Commas. This is the podcast all about exits, and we talk to luminaries and industry leaders that have sold their business for seven figures or more. Today, I'm joined by Miles Valentine. Miles has been described as a serial entrepreneur. I've known Miles for a number of years, and he was very strong in the telco space originally, and then moved into telco software. And so Miles has been around tech for probably more time than he cares to remember. And he had a wonderful exit back in the early teens in New Zealand. So first up, please welcome along Miles. Miles, thanks very much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks, Josh. Yeah, good to be here.
Great. Always like to start these conversations with a bit of an insight into the origin story. So would you mind giving us a bit of a snapshot of the early days for Miles' kind of career and some significant moments in your journey, please?
Yeah, sure. Well, without wanting to go too far back, I was working in property development during the 80s, the very real bubble that we all found out was a bubble when there were 42 listed property development companies on the New Zealand stock market, and after 87 there were two left about 3 years later. So sure enough, company went fut. In fact, I resigned before the end because it was very plain to see, and sat there literally thinking, what am I going to get into? Long story, I won't bore you with. I started selling telephone systems or started a business selling telephone systems with two partners. And because telecom was deregulating, God bless Roger Douglas. Those were the days when, if you recall, you're probably too young, but it took you 6 weeks to get a telephone line, and it took you 6 weeks to buy a fax machine. If you had a bottle of scotch, you could get a lot quicker, and I'm not kidding. The post office operated very, very, very inefficiently. Anyway, we got into selling phone systems, did that rather well. Grew a business. That was where I discovered sales process and the value of a sales process. We very religiously followed a sales trainer called Brian Tracy, Psychology of Selling program. And we being the sales team, we had about a dozen sales people. We had a couple of girls and 10 guys. We followed a model and a process and frankly cleaned telecom up. And we were the second biggest supplier of phone systems in the country. We had offices in Wellington, Christchurch, and telecom were 20 times bigger than we were, but we were the second biggest. Got acquired by Ubix, had a very real restraint of trade not to get back into phone systems, so started Zcom, which was voice technology at the time. And we built call center software. So we took control of the PBX over when somebody rang an 800 number. And again, in 1994, this was quite new stuff. I mean, 800 numbers they were out there and they were around, but they were about 64 cents a minute, literally. They were mind-bogglingly expensive. But people were starting to realize the value of a call center. And they were called call centers and not contact centers. So we started building the software that controlled the calls. So when somebody rang the 800 number, we decided who they talked to, decided the messages they listened to, we reported on the call. We invented callback. In fact, when I say we, a chap called Peter Bonham, who was our senior lead developer guy, invented it. And to this day, press 1 to retain your position in queue and we'll call you back just as if you'd waited was exactly how we started it. So that was 1994, the start of voice technology. We moved into Australia. At that stage, we only connected to the NEC telephone system, which was one of the dominant systems in New Zealand, but was the dominant system in Australia. And so we expanded into Australia, partnered up with NEC. They ended up ultimately taking our product and selling it for us, but initially it was more of a partnership. And then when my daughter was born, December 96, my wife spent the next year, I was gone every Monday morning at on the 6 a.m. flight to Sydney, and I'd come home at midnight on Thursday, and God bless my sister-in-law who called in and helped my wife bath the older baby, because I wasn't there for the first year, and lived in Sydney, and that went pretty well. In fact, it went very well. It was good. So, and then I'm giving a bit of a history now, but then New Zealand Trade and Enterprise in 1999 brought about 20 venture capital investors down from Taiwan, of all places. And there were a group of, I don't know, actually I didn't really even know how many, but I guess a dozen or so technology companies pitched to them. Now, 1999, no one really knew what VC was. I mean, it was, we didn't really know what it was. Well, in fact, no, we didn't know what it was. We just thought it was money. And we knew we needed money. We were thinking about, well, just expansion generally, not really having thought that far ahead. We were going well. You know, we were making good sales. We were profitable to the extent we were investing in ourselves. And anyway, so we pitched to these 20-odd people sitting in a room. And about 6 weeks later, I get a phone call from a guy called Stephen Cheng, who was actually the CTO of Acer Computers. And he was also head of their venture capital company, which was called Hontang. And, you know, literally it was a phone call out of the blue. He rings me up and he said, Miles, Stephen Cheng, he spoke excellent English. We'd like you to come to Taipei. We'd like to invest in your business. And I'm like, sorry, who were you again? and anyway, so we went out and retained what we called at the time a consultant. There was a company floating around called Caltech, which was nothing to do with any American company. It was a couple of individuals, Douglas Paul and Wendy Hall, and I think there was another partner. But we dealt with them. We retained them. I went up to Taipei with Wendy. She came with me to act as my consultant because I don't know. In fact, I suspect she didn't either. But, you know, we really didn't know what the hell we were doing. We really had no idea. And anyway, we went up there. We met a number of people over the course of a few days, came back to New Zealand, and about a week later, they came back and said, okay, we're prepared to put $1 million Kiwi in if you can match it from local investors. And again, back at that time frame, we had quite a number of Taiwanese immigrants that had moved to Auckland, and Acer Computers holds a very strong reputational, well, very strong everything position in Taiwan. It was a bit like in the old days, you know, Fletcher Challenger was to New Zealand. You know, if Fletcher Challenger was investing, then Kiwis would have followed type thing. And so Caltech raised $1 million locally, predominantly from Taiwanese investors. And we had our $2 million Kiwi. And that was about September, October, November, 99.
Wow.
Well, at the time, the currency was 40 cents in the dollar. So 2 million Kiwi was actually only 800 grand US, which, as we learned very quickly, was nowhere near enough to move to America on. So, but I moved. So this January 2000, wife and now 3-year-old daughter and 4-year-old son, we moved to Southern California, and I think we ran out of money in June.
Wow, it's just a few months later.
Wow. It was we just so underestimated how much. And again, these were the days where there was no SaaS. You had to buy all of your hardware for your IT environment. You had to create a LAN, and something that I think is now well known. But because you're coming from New Zealand, you've got no credit history. So we prepaid our entire 1-year lease on our apartment for the whole year, plus a $5,000 US, because everything's in US, of course, dog deposit to bring the dog over or to have the dog there. And yeah, you ran out of money fast. The thing that enabled us to ultimately succeed, which came out of left field, was screen sharing technology was just starting then. Because when we first started in February, we brought a couple of Kiwis with us who were acting as channel managers, and their job was to go out and find NEC resellers in America to resell our product. And we did that reasonably successfully. We found a group and found a list and got on the phone and called them and set up and we set up appointments. And the Kiwi way being, you go out and have a meeting. You get on but what that means over there is you get on a plane, you go and see them. Well, that's freaking expensive and very time consuming. And and back in the day, every demo we did was face to face. So we started within about 2 weeks, realized you can't do this. This is ridiculous. But as I say, screen sharing technology was just starting. So we started to be able to do remote demos. If that hadn't come along, and the work from home thing's quite topical at the moment, obviously. America was working from home in 2000 because you don't have offices over there where everybody works in the office. They're all over the country, big place. at the end of ZCom in 2012, I think we had about 65 people around America, and there were only 15 or 20 in the office, because everybody's working from home as they do. So the screen sharing thing enabled us to do remote demos, and we kind of got on our feet. And that was kind of the start of ZCom getting to that point. And by this stage, we changed the name. Voice technology. There were 2 voice technologies in the US, so we changed to ZCom. Silly process about how do you go through changing names. We paid a consultant until I got fed up with the first bill that came in. I was like, we're not going to do that. And then a lovely girl called Teresa Murphy in our marketing department said, well, what about ZCom? Because everything had to be called com in those days, if you remember.
Yes, of course.
Com was, if you were a .com, it mattered.
It increased your value.
Yeah, but again, there were, when the family was moving and people go, you're going to America, that's fantastic. And I go, look, it's a bit like a gold rush. I don't know whether the gold's going to run out. I don't know whether it's going to work. I don't know whether we're going to find it, but we're going. So, and really, what turned out to be a fantastic adventure. I really, I was not that keen to move to America at that point. I really liked New Zealand. I thought it was the best country in the world, and why would I want to leave? But at that point, when I got to America, I really started. I enjoyed it a lot, and the opportunity, and I think we hear pretty regularly that it's a great country to go and do business in, and so it was a great adventure, and then we went through. I don't know whether you're going to ask about all some of the really interesting mistakes that we ultimately made.
I'll definitely get to those.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure you will.
There's a lot to unpack there. The thing that stands out for me probably about that journey is that it's been said that success involves sacrifice. And so what I heard you say is that early on in the ZCom voice technology journey, you made the decision to invest a lot of energy into the business, and the consequence of that was the family time that you had.
Oh, yeah.
And then you decided to move country as well. And so that's a lifestyle sacrifice, a quality of living, access and continued dialogue with friends and family. Those things have to happen along the way as well. And so I don't think it's something that people often reflect upon from the outside, the overnight success story and, sold for a whole bunch of money, and they don't appreciate there's been a lot of decisions along the way, because every decision has consequences that involve sacrifice. So I just thought I'd call that out. I'm curious, you bootstrapped at the start, you raised in 1999, just pre-tech wreck, which was fantastic timing. If it had been 6 months later, the money probably wouldn't have existed. And so what happened? You ran out of money relatively quickly in the United States without delving too deeply into it. I'm curious as to how you solved that problem that you faced when you ran out of cash flow quite quickly. What did you do?
Well, one of the, by this stage, Caltech had gone off and as the VC market was evolving in New Zealand, AMP, a part of AMP that doesn't exist anymore, I think, had decided that they wanted to get into VC, and Douglas Paul had picked up a contract to manage AMP's VC portfolio, which didn't really exist at the time. In fact, they acquired another business that had a portfolio, and Douglas started to manage that on their behalf as a manager on contract. So suddenly we had, well, I'll say access. I mean, we had an entree into AMP money, and at that point, they chose to invest alongside Hontang. And so a degree of luck. Right. We were kind of right place, right time, talking to the right person, and well, it was actually a good decision for them. They, funny enough, at the end, they got out too early. They actually sold before we made our sale, which was a really... I ended up writing to them about 3 times to make it very, very clear in writing that I was recommending they did not sell when they did, which was in about 2011. But anyway, they chose to. But back then in 2000, it was a good, not bankable, riskable, VC investment, and ultimately it did pay off. I mean, the valuation then I think was 6 Kiwi. 7 Kiwi.
Oh wow! Okay.
So it was a reason. It was, and look, as we all know with VC valuations, they're very much put your finger in your mouth and wait for the wind. So, but yeah, so right place, right time, and And then ACC bought a bit of. I had a problem with my partner, as often happens, or he had a problem with me. I'm not sure, but no, I had a problem with him, and we ended up. Yeah, I won't go into that path because there's a few individuals that are well known around New Zealand, but we ended up. ACC ended up buying part of my partner's stake, and so now we had AMP and ACC in there, and so we were reasonably funded. But then we didn't actually raise much more for well, actually, we didn't raise much more. We grew within. Yeah, I wouldn't say we bootstrapped it. We were sort of growing reasonably and making profit, and the more we grew. We just had to manage our investment alongside how the revenue and margins were going. And software, it's copy colon A, and you've got another copy of it. So if you can keep growing, and again, it was pre-SaaS, so we were selling. It was the day every first of every month you were back to zero. And again, back from the telephony space, telephony had no concept around maintenance contracts. So the telephony market pushed back really hard on paying a support contract for this, what they thought was a piece of telephony, but it wasn't. It was a piece of software. So that was a real hurdle we had to get over in that sector. And so by the time we sold, we had about a $750,000 US of maintenance coming in every month, which was a start. But we it was quite a big machine by then. We needed to sell 3 to 4 million a month. So every month, and that was a thing that I certainly did not miss after we sold. That constant every month, where are you at with the number? Yeah. Because if you didn't get over that break-even point of whatever it was, 3.2, 3.4, and you lost money. But the moment you got over it, you were at 88% GP, and suddenly you were in clover. So if you were 300 grand above your break-even point, then it was a great month. Yes. And if you're 300 below, it hurt. It hurt. Yeah. So as I say, it was the days before SaaS, and
We've started to delve into the numbers, and you mentioned the P word along the way there, which is interesting. So I believe business and life is quite cyclical. And so you talked about profit, which in the early noughties was the thing that you were building your business to achieve at a certain point in time. And then you'd build upon that and then hope that someone might turn up and value that revenue stream, those customer set, the geographies that you're working in, all those things that lead to a great exit. And then, of course, during the late teens and the early 20s, we went through the heyday of invest at all costs and get revenue at all costs. And so valuations went through the roof and business fundamentals seem to be forgotten about. But we're back to that space again of profit being very, very important. So it's just funny how these things kind of turn around. But I'd like to kind of start to delve into the exit itself. And you started to talk about some kind of revenue metrics. I'm curious if we could get a sense of the scale of the business at when you went through the sale, 3 to 4 million US per month, 750K or so. If we could just clarify kind of the scale around these numbers, the offices, the number of staff that you had, just to kind of expose the value, the volume of the business at that point.
Yeah, as I said, what we had realised, unfortunately, and I can't really tell you when it was, call centres wasn't a great space. While it was nice and technical and really, looked pretty good, it was bloody hard. There's a lot of technology that go and again, not SaaS. So when we sold a system, we had installers that would turn up on site, walk into an IT room, and with a server, sometimes quite a big server, in fact, oftentimes a big server, and plug it in. And plugging it in and making it go was hard work. Well, it required a lot of expertise, telephony expertise, IT expertise, and that expertise was hard to find, and relatively expensive. And then we needed trainers to train the users in how to. It sounds simple, log on, log off, but how to use the system, how to program it, how to manage it, the administration, and so forth. So the realization was it didn't scale very well. It was hard work to scale because of all this expertise that was required. Now, if it had been in a SaaS world where you could literally kind of turn it on and then just train people how to use it, well, that would have been an awful lot more scalable. So we had this somewhat uncomfortable realization, as I say, I'm not sure when it was, probably mid-2000s, like, okay, this is quite hard. And when we were looking at the multiples of whatever, and we tracked those multiples pretty carefully, or I certainly did. There were a number of M&A sources of information around acquisitions and what they'd gone at, and we weren't really. We knew we were at the low end of the multiples. 1, 2, God bless, maybe 3, and
times revenue.
Times revenue. Yeah, times revenue. And we were only doing the profitability because, again, and at the time I kind of talked about it with a few commentators afterwards. I mean, we probably should have gone way smarter and raised an awful lot more capital, like one of our big competitors did, Genesis, who, they started like about the same time as we did, but they went out and raised 70 million, and they were acquired by Alcatel, and kind of the rest was history, and just went big from the start. And we had this small to medium positioning because we'd come from New Zealand. We thought that was, again, big mistake. We should have gone a lot bigger, a lot faster. So lots of lessons, but so the scalability was a problem, which ultimately was then going to affect your revenue multiple. So there was, I'd say, some disappointment there, obviously, because we would have much rather been a 5x than I don't know what we ended up at being. It was in the low ones in terms of the revenue, and because we'd chosen not to, and again, my board was made up of it. Every one of them was an accountant except me and the chairman, who was a Kiwi actually, but Canadian. So I had a very fiscally driven board who were very, very focused on governance and numbers, but numbers being profitability, not growth. And they did not want to dilute. They did not want to go and raise overseas capital. So,
You're kind of constrained
in that
respect.
It was and when people asked at the end of the day, and we got a bit of criticism at the time, why did you sell? You sold too early. You sold out. God, the shareholders all hated each other by the end of it. It was
you're 18 years in by then as well. It's not exactly early days.
Well, they'd been in for about 12 years at that point,
right.
But still, there was a lot of, hated is the wrong word, but they were all ready to move on.
Lots of conflict.
I was spending a third of my month just sort of going around the shareholders and keeping them all kind of in line. It was time. It was definitely time.
Yeah.
And as I say, we sort of realised the scalability wasn't such. So we were also about to go through this massive. We had moved onto the Microsoft platform, which wasn't a PBX box anymore. It was this amorphous sort of thing of software that floated around. Ultimately the cloud. So we had to do this major migration shift, technology change to not plugging in literally with an Ethernet cable into a box, but integrating with this very nebulous telephony platform. And back in the day, Microsoft didn't understand the value of telephony always working. When you think back 15 years ago, if a phone call ever cut off, it was like, what went wrong?
You look like you were a bunch of cowboys,
exactly.
basically.
Like, wow, that's not reliable. Well, nowadays, we have so many drop calls on cell phone networks.
You don't even think about it.
Oh, I lost you.
Yeah.
And so Microsoft weren't ready for telephony. I don't know what state they're in now, but back in the day, I mean, there was no, who do we ring if it doesn't work? What do you need to do that? Just send us an email. No, the call center's down. This thing's making 5,000 in revenue every 10 minutes. What do you mean we got to send you an email? So there was a real change difference in expectations between us and them. But sorry, that's coming back to the point of the multiple. So we had a major change that we had done, but we could see it was just going to keep on going, and it was keeping on going. So there were a number of reasons to, okay, let's look at our quote strategic options, and that's what we did. And then we started the process of looking at the strategic options and identifying an investment banker, as they were called, and we picked a company called Comrie that
offshore based or
offshore based, Washington, Seattle, Washington based, and we started going through the process.
Okay. Talk us through that. So for those unfamiliar dealing with investment bankers, because the way that I look at the world is that at the small end of town, you'll deal with a business broker. Then if you're medium, you'll deal with one of the Fat Four M&A divisions typically. And at the top end of town typically is where the investment bankers kick in. But I'm curious about the nature of the experience with those folk, how they manage the process. Was it a white glove kind of, silver service sort of experience, or was it a bit loose and wild? Kind of just unpack that a little bit for us, if you could, please.
It was very hands-on. I mean, the first thing they really said, well, they got to know the business a bit. They decided, okay, they could understand it. Then, okay, so they're asking me, you tell me, who do you think would buy you? So we came up with a list of 30, 40 entities that were in different groups. And then they added a few, who did they know inside all those organizations? And that's one of the criteria that we sort of looked at in terms of how well connected were they. And then they pulled together you write the IM, the information memorandum, they finesse it, and then they send out basically a 2-pager, just, got a client, the space, if you're interested, come back, and then the bigger IM goes out to those that are interested, and I ended up on we ended up on a roadshow, traveling around, probably went to 7 or 8 people or entities that had got the full IM, were definitely serious, had the grunt, they could do it. And we did that over the course of a couple of weeks.
So it was like a shortlist series of meetings. You turn up, do a bit of a pitch, explain the business, where
it's
you're
a
at.
little bit more than that, because they had a reasonable, most of them knew the space. They'd all obviously read the IM. They'd furnished a set of questions. We'd answered them. So no, the actual meetings were more than an hour. They were, we were there for probably 2, 3, 4 hours in each one, as we went into a level of detail,
like pre-due diligence almost.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yes, exactly. And to get them to the point of, were they qualification that they were interested in us, and were we interested in them? And that was probably a lesser concern, to be fair. Did that roadshow, and then it's all about the tension that the investment banker can create, obviously, and the goal being that you want 2 or 3 people, 3 or 4 or 4 or 5, the more the merrier. The more the merrier you've got at the table at the end who want to buy you, the better. And yes, so that's a key piece of the investment banker's role, to get multiple parties at the table at the same time.
So you had 7 predominantly North America based, I'm guessing.
All North America.
All North America based. Yeah. They went through the process of the pre-DD. And so how many were they thinned down to that then went into deep DD, and 2. What was the process? 2? Okay, great. So you had a little bit of deal tension going on there.
So there was and I was going to say modicum, but there was a reasonable amount of tension. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So we kind of knew then, we had a fish on the hook. Just now a question of going through getting the fish into the boat, and then as it evolved, one acquirer sort of got way more interested, and which was a company called Engehouse, and the guy behind Engehouse, and look, I should have looked up before we came to this. I assume he's still alive. He was reasonably old. I'm getting reasonably old now. He was probably mid-60s, I guess, early 60s when he acquired us 12 years ago. So I assume he's still around. But he is an inveterate acquirer. He had bought something like 200 companies before he bought us, which was a staggering number. He put together a company in Canada called OpenText as a roll-up, which I think is still one of Canada's largest software companies. And he had a model and he had a formula and he did not stray from that formula. So we ended up employing a US-based financial controller for the period of the acquisition, which was only about 4 months. This guy did very well out of the options, I have to say. In fact, he sent me a note afterwards thanking me for paying for his kids' college education.
You're welcome.
Yeah, it was quite unique.
It was a curious decision. So a US-based CFO because he spoke the same language
because
and
he was in the same time zones. He was there. He could deal with them, and so his big and first task was to take all of our financials, and we had New Zealand, Australia, US, UK, Asia financials that we prepared every month, obviously consolidated, putting all of those into his formula, into literally his spreadsheet. And that was one of the mornings that I woke up at 4 a.m. because Steve was in Toronto, and I rang up to find out what had gone on overnight, and I got Steve, and he said, "Oh, I've got a problem." I was like, "Shoot, what have we got?" Because our process was really fast. We did the LOI over the course of Easter. I was actually up at my beach house in the far north, and I literally went through every phone. I had landlines, cell phones, backup batteries, everything. Every day I was on the phone solidly for 3 days to Steve and to Nat, the investment banker, negotiating the LOI. And so between then and the deal went unconditional on May 31. So it was between about April the 8th and May 31, which is phenomenally quick.
Remarkable. That's like 7 weeks or so.
But it's because this guy had a formula.
Yep.
He was just so damn good, or so damn structured at how he did it. And so I rang up Steve one morning, and we got a problem. I said, what problem? Because that was probably the 7 busiest weeks of my life, I think. It really was 16, 18 hours all day, every day, just until he went to bed, and you wake up in the morning straight on the phone to Steve. And Frank, the US-based finance guy, he had just completed, after about 2 weeks of work, this whole recategorization of all of our numbers to theirs into his format. And he had put his PC into the trunk of his car, and gone out to dinner with Steve as he'd finished it. Steve was still at work. Steve never went home. And Frank had finished at whatever time it was in Toronto in the office. Steve had said, "You want dinner?" Frank had said, "Yes." Put the PC into the boot. Gone for dinner, come back, boot's jimmied, computer's gone. Wow. So it's whatever time it was in the morning in Toronto, I'm trying to get hold of Frank. He's on the plane flying back to California, and I don't know whether he's done a backup. So it was about the most uncomfortable 4 or 5 hours as I waited to get hold of Frank. Had he backed it up before he put the freaking computer into the back of the car?
Pre-cloud days, of course. Everything sat on discs.
It was just into, and he had backed it up.
Yeah.
He had backed it up.
Great discipline.
Frank worked on, he had a Mac, and he had put it into iCloud, and thank God, because Steve was one of those sort of short attention type guys. He was ready to move on to the next acquisition.
Yeah,
he was sort of getting to the end of it, and if we'd had to start again, I don't think we would have got back there. So anyway, that was a blip. But the due diligence. So Steve and an accountant from Toronto and a lawyer from Toronto, he turned up in New Zealand mid the DD process. I don't remember when it was, probably the end of April. And I did a tour with him. We went round, we went to NEC in Australia. We went to Cisco, who we partnered up with at that stage. We were a partner of Cisco's in the call center space. We went to resellers. He did his own due diligence, as in the face-to-face kind of interviewing. And he was an interesting fish. He really was. I remember his shoe. The guy was worth a fortune. I mean,
probably a billionaire in today's terms.
Yeah. In those days, it was. I think we calculated his shareholdings worth about $500 million, and just in Inchhouse it was at the time.
Wow.
And the first airport, his shoe fell apart, and the very first airport. So he just said to the girl behind the counter, he said, have you got some of that?
Some duct tape.
It's fragile tape. He taped his shoe up, and we went around like for the rest of the week with his shoe. I said, Steve, do you want to go to a shoe shop? We'll get some, no, it's okay.
No time.
Seriously,
and no interest.
It was really, he was an interesting fish. But
I love it.
Nice. Look, balanced, nice guy, but very financially driven.
It's been said that time kills deals, and ordinarily a quick DD process is one that tends to take 4, maybe 6 months or so. 7 weeks is remarkable, and so that demonstrates, as you said, a experience base and a maturity around the DD and an understanding of what it was that he was looking for and looking at as well, no doubt. But what do you believe was the thing that got him across the line? So why did ultimately the deal get done for Inchhouse to buy Zcom?
We were very clean. It was relatively easy.
Okay, so when you say clean,
well, just it was a relatively simple business. There was we had lots and lots of product validation. I mean, we had, as I said, 3,500 sites that were running all the time. They didn't stop. He could see we had the people we said we had. He could see that he talked to the resellers that we said we had. There were no. I mean, one of the scary things for the founder or the board when you sell a business is the reps, and if they're buying the company, which they did in our case, the reps and warranties you sign. And at the end of the day, I was perfectly comfortable signing them because I knew them intimately. I'd been involved in every step of the way, and so the reason it was so quick, I think, was it was a very clean deal, and I can't remember if I said it before, but we were one of the first companies he bought. He normally bought distressed companies. He normally bought companies that were in the crap, and we were not. And we had a couple of conversations about this while we were traveling, and because he sort of had to get his head around that we were, we were making sales, making money, we were okay, and because he wasn't used to that.
Yes.
So at the time, I mean, the investment banker said, "Wow, that's going to be quick," with the deadline that he'd set, and I didn't really know any better. It was the first real DD I'd ever been into, that was for sure. So. And I got to say, at the end of the 7 weeks, thank God it was only 7 weeks, because I don't think I could have lasted.
Would have killed you.
Jeez, it might have killed me. It was really very, very intense. So it was a clean, easy deal, and also he was so kind of experienced. There was no earn out. I had no retention. He wanted me to stay for a year. At the end of the day, as I say, deal was done May 31. I rang him up in about September and said, "Steve, this isn't working." Because he'd made me, understandably, and it was fine. I was now Asia Pacific president, so I wasn't running the company because the company was being morphed into Inchhouse. My US president, the existing US Zcom president, became the US president for Inchhouse because he lived there, and that made sense. And he was a very good operator. And look, I didn't really care. I didn't care about the title or the role, but running Asia Pacific wasn't really going to cut it. I didn't, if I was going to hang around, I wanted to do something a bit more meaningful. And also, fair to say, I was 18 years have been a long time. So I rang him up in September and said, "Hey, Steve, I'm figuring you're expecting this call," and he definitely was, which is why he hadn't put a retention in there, because he knew that I probably wouldn't last.
Sunset.
Yeah, and he said, "Look, do me a favour, let's not tell anybody till December." And I said, "Yep, that's fine." So I stayed quiet, and early December I announced to the staff and said, "Hey guys and girls, I'm leaving at the end of the month." And he had an Australian guy who he brought in to replace me, and kind of handover was complete.
Yeah.
So he was a very savvy acquirer, which and you hear so many tales of woe of companies that are, well, not woe, that's probably the right word, but troubles in integration, and it's difficult.
Yes.
This one was actually pretty easy. It worked out for him. He had a as I've said a few times, he's a very financially driven guy. That was the very first line on their website. We are a financially driven company.
That's clear.
Didn't say we're people orientated, we believe in culture. No. We are a financially driven company. If it wasn't in the budget, it did not happen.
Okay.
And budget time, as I heard from Ernie, the US president, they were
was pretty brutal.
interesting times.
Yeah,
Everything worked by that budget. So, but Steve rang me up probably about, I don't know, July, August, and he said, Miles, we're not charging enough for maintenance. I'm gonna double them. I'm doubling maintenance
overnight, right?
And I went, whoa, Steve, hold on. It's been a really long, and so I started to try to talk him out. He said, Miles, I'm not asking for your opinion. I'm ringing up to tell you we're doubling maintenance. So effective 90 days, we're doubling maintenance.
Do you remember how many customers you lost? 2. Wow.
2.
Phenomenal.
I was so wrong. I was so wrong. I kicked myself over that for
leaving so much money on the table as a consequence of that.
So many times.
Oh,
God, what an idiot! We could have been making so much more money because if our maintenance had even been $300,000 more a month, that would have damn near doubled our profitability in the last year of business. He doubled it and lost 2.
Wow. People often say that one of the first things you do when you buy a business is come in and put prices up by 10% and see what happens, but putting them up by 100% is a bold move.
It was a big lesson for me.
We've bled into the next bit of the conversation, which is things that you, in hindsight, look back upon and go, wow, we could have done that a lot better. Or if we'd just seen this thing coming, it would have had a markedly different result. So that's clearly one of them. What are the other things that spring to mind for you around potential missteps or things that if you'd handled differently would have had a quite a big impact on the outcome?
Yeah, we sort of moved out of small to medium as our space faster. It took us way too long to realize that selling bigger things is better. And I kind of blame that or attribute that back to our sort of New Zealand and Australian upbringing where, we think that small to medium's okay. And that's our place in the world, particularly in the American space, because that's where we play. We should have gone bigger. We sort of focused on the bigger market a lot faster. But that's the first big mistake we made. And this was at the time quite very big. We were approached, or we found there was a company called Exponets that was a roll-up company in itself that had been put together in the US, and they acquired the Avaya growing and emerging markets business, which basically the Avaya PBX space under about 500 extensions, they were the biggest reseller in the world of telephone systems at that time. And they were acquired by this roll-up company called Exponets, and I chased down Exponets, got to the head office was actually in Santa Clarita, which was about 2 hours north of us. We were in Orange County. Got to basically sold into them. Long story short, they said to us, "Okay, we want to take your product on. We want to brand it, and we want first right of refusal to buy you in 2 years' time." And and there was a degree of exclusivity in there too on the NEC system. They wanted exclusive supply on the NEC system, and no, I've got that wrong. Sorry, exclusive supply on the Avaya system. We could keep the NEC stuff out to one side. So we thought we died and gone to heaven. And biggest reseller in the world, in America, wants to take your product on, wants it exclusive. Fantastic. So within about a year, they got up to about 3 million in revenue. By that stage, we were doing 4 in the US. And on Halloween 2003, and there was some things going on just immediately before that. Avaya realized that they had made a huge mistake selling this business and they needed it back. So they reacquired it back from Exponets. And Exponets had got themselves in trouble on the share market because they were subject to a shorting stock play. And they got themselves in the crap. And they needed to sell it. So they sold it back to Avaya. Well, Avaya, the first thing they did, we've got 3/4 of our business with this reseller. On Halloween, I get this phone call from the MD or the CEO of Exponets going, "Look, Miles, I don't know how to say this, but we've been reacquired by Avaya. You need to talk to them.
You've been shafted. Is the context of that call?
We lost three. Within 90 days, they took us off. They initially told us that no, there's a place for you. Very good in the low end call center space. That we need you. Blah blah blah. And over the course of 90 days, the more conversations we had, the more we started thinking, these guys are going to drop us, and that was a big problem. So huge lesson: don't ever have too many of your eggs in one basket, even if the baskets are really appears really attractive. So that was a very tough year. We grew 15%. We took it all back. That was when we started to really push maintenance. We did up our maintenance at the time. We started to do it all directly, which was really good because we started getting 100% of it instead of about 40%, which is what we were getting through the reseller. So lots of good things came out of it, but boy, it was a bloody tough year, 2004. And as I say, we grew 15% by the end of it, but we grew an awful. It was one of the better things that happened to us actually, because and in the meantime, the board had agreed to this. And I was fairly naive from a, I guess, equity side or corporate structure side. You never ever want to have an exclusive and a right of first refusal, because no acquirer is ever going to look at you knowing that all the work they do to acquire you can be undone because somebody over the fence has got a first right of refusal if they want to buy it instead. So, my message I've said to many, many, many entrepreneurs over the years is don't ever, ever have a first right of refusal with anybody, because it destroys your ability to sell yourself, basically.
It's interesting because that was essentially like a downstream sales opportunity. And so I think as opposed to supply side.
Well, and as a Kiwi company, I've got something that's going to buy me. You just don't realise that you've got no tension in that situation, because no one's ever going to provide the tension. So you're never going to maximise your outcome. So that was another very aligned to that same experience lesson out of that.
Yes.
Those are a couple of goodies.
So going through the negotiation process, you mentioned that you had a bunch of different investors, and there was some conflict that was between those investors and some challenge in managing those people. You had obviously a board, you had partners, distributors, etc. to consider. So I'm curious as to when you got to the negotiating table and when you were evaluating the terms that were able to have some pushback and some movement on. How did you privilege those different terms, and what became really important to you as you were negotiating?
Good news is I had a good chairman, and the Canadian chairman was actually excellent too. But we ended up, the board wanted a New Zealand-based chairman, and we ended up actually ultimately getting rid of Owen, which was a shame because he was good. But I've got to say, Brian Allen, who was our chairman at the time of sale, the sale negotiation was really, when I was using all those batteries up that weekend, a lot of those phone calls were to Brian, and he gave me some excellent advice. Do
you recall any specific things that he mentioned at the time? Sorry, it's a while back.
I probably can't recall the specifics, but he was invaluable, and also actually during that next 7 weeks, because he was very, very good. So Brian and I basically just did the best thing. Well, I'll say for the business, we didn't, because it was going to be good for the business, it was going to be good for the shareholders. So we didn't really, and by that stage, the shareholders were all like, just get a deal done. Thankfully, there weren't any specific things that any of them wanted or didn't want. We could just do the right thing for the business, get as clean a deal as we possibly could. I think we were all in agreement. We didn't want an earn-out type situation. We all knew that those are fraught with grief, and particularly actually in Engehouse's structure, we were definitely going to be morphed into them pretty much immediately. I mean, an earn-out wouldn't have worked. So Brian and I really just did the cleanest deal we could do, and that worked. And we probably we probably missed out on, I don't know, another million or two. Not sure, maybe. I don't think it would have been any more, but the clean deal was definitely very valuable.
Yeah, and in the grand scheme of things, my recollection, 30.6 million USD, about 40 odd million Kiwis. So, 1 or 2 million here, easy to say, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not that material.
Well, particularly when you either, one hand you get a deal, on the other hand, you want 2 more million more and you haven't.
Yeah.
It's like, oops. So, as I think it was fair to say we were all at the time we were all pretty happy.
Yes.
It was a good outcome for, as I said, we'd kind of figured out it was a tough space that was going to have more of a tough space coming. So we were, we'd kind of fought our fight, and Inchhouse has actually continued. They've continued to do pretty well.
Okay.
I must admit I haven't looked at there. I wish actually in hindsight that probably the thing that none of the shareholders wanted, and I probably didn't either at the time, we wanted to be paid in cash. We didn't want to get stock. We should have taken stock because the Inchhouse stock quadrupled over the next 2 years. Yeah.
Timing wise, yeah, okay.
It was, Steve was a very good manager as a public company, and as a public company entity in Canada, they performed very, very well. So it woulda, coulda, shoulda. We should have taken some stock instead. But but then again, he probably wouldn't have given it because he valued his stock immensely highly.
Right.
He'd rather pay cash. He wanted to pay cash. So we all thought that we were good. We were all on the same page. In hindsight, Ernie, the US president, did very well out of the option scheme because there were quite a few options with 4-year terms to them. So I won't say they came cheaply by any means. He valued his options of the stock very highly, but Ernie did well over the course of the next 4 years' time out of Inchhouse options. Which was good. So yeah.
So you were a long time in telco once you add it all up. The PBXs through the 80s and early 90s, and then you started Voice Technologies, Ecom. Exited in 2012. So both of those things happened in the same year. Did you go, I'm going to wade back into the telco space, or I'm going to take some time out, or I'm going to move into a completely different part of the world because I am over telco? What did you do afterwards?
Yeah, I was over telco, and I mean, at the end of the day, I'm a sales guy. I couldn't even identify a line of code. I mean, I don't know a damn thing about software development. I do actually, but I don't know how to write software. I know quite a bit now how to make good software, but I learned that slowly. But as I'm fundamentally a revenue focused type person. I didn't really want to. I didn't want to get back into telco. I kind of did not much for a little while, and then I started to do some angel investing. Kind of enjoyed that, but then realized I didn't really enjoy putting small amounts of money into companies. It was a bit of a, as they say, spray and pray type situation. But there's been some very good outcomes lately. Comrie being one where spray and pray has worked extremely well, which is fantastic. I mean, New Zealand needs some successes, or more successes. But no, I actually teamed up with a guy, Mike Stokes, and we started a sales leadership, mentoring, networking type operation. We were called Sales Syndicate. It's now called Indicator, and we ran. We had 4 groups of about 15 sales leaders. We'd meet once a month. We'd bring in a speaker. We'd try to educate them and enhance their knowledge about sales leadership. And I really enjoyed doing that for about 4 years. And then Mike wanted to make it bigger. I was very happy with a relatively small monthly commitment that it required for the 4 groups. And we very amicably parted ways, and he's gone on to make Indicator much bigger and better. So I enjoyed doing that for about till just before COVID, actually, and then I've done a bit of consulting since. I'm definitely on the sort of phase out. I'm now predominantly spending most of my time down in the South Island and playing a fair bit of golf. Should be a scratch golfer by the amount of golf I'm playing, but I'm not. nowhere near it. A fair bit of golf and mountain biking and walking and it's really quite enjoying.
The fruits of the labour,
pretty
so to
much
speak.
retirement.
Yeah.
So, So no, I'm relatively very happy.
Yeah, great. Yes.
Yeah.
I think it's always a bit of a tension for a lot of us to achieve that consistent kind of satisfaction and contentment.
But it definitely takes a conscious decision not to go for the next things.
Yes.
Really, because
it's easy
there's
to
a
get
little
caught
voice
up.
telling you probably should. Why aren't you? And then there's another voice saying, maybe not. So.
I call that the tyranny of drive. So from the outside, people that don't necessarily have drive look at those of us that do and they say, well, you're lucky you have drive. And I say, that's like a monkey that's on your back 24/7. And it's the thing that wakes you up at 3 a.m. and the thing that insists that you work on the weekend, and the thing that says to you when you've sold a company and you're financially secure that you should go out and do another thing again. And so it becomes a bit of a beast to have to tame.
It's taken me a long time not to feel guilty about not doing things.
Yeah.
And that guilt thing is very real. When you, maybe I should be. So long time.
Yes.
Yeah. But
parting question for you, Miles. So in an alternate universe, one that didn't see you head down the path of becoming a very competent salesperson and then becoming a founder of a few different companies and then exiting those things. So the career path that you look at that you could have had and you go with some interest, I wonder what that would have been like for me to do, the vocation that would have been fascinating or enjoyable for you.
I would have stayed in property.
Okay.
Which is a very New Zealand answer. I don't mean that, but I really enjoyed the property development we were doing in the 80s. The company I worked for, Bexley, was doing a few different things, and we were building a timeshare. We were sort of trying to be a little bit non-traditional, but property development I really quite enjoyed, and I would have liked to have stayed there. If I had an alternate, and my son is now in commercial real estate, and I really like that property space. Not. I don't own flats and things like that. I'm not saying that. I'm talking about commercial.
Yeah, same.
Commercial development, adding value. Taking a piece of land and building something and turning it into something with way more value.
Yes.
That would have been the other path if and I could have nearly followed that. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were off
Funny
camera.
how fate comes. Fate works in a very strange way. I mean, I bought a hutch dresser, a Comrie hutch dresser on the side of the road, took it to a paint stripper to get the varnish taken off, and in the furniture place were all these cordless phones. And it was an American guy who'd come down to New Zealand to work for Telecom as part of that whole US ROC regional operating company structure. And he brought all these cordless phones down. And I had a mate who worked for Sanyo who'd shown me a cordless phone. Again, this is 1985 or 6. I remember ringing up my mother and saying, Mum, you're not going to believe this. I'm talking on a telephone, there's no cord. She's like, don't be stupid. I said, truly, I am. Anyway, so I as a sideline, while I was at Bexley, I started selling these things to my friends. And I was getting $350 and they were costing me, I don't know, 100 to land. And that's how I got into phones. It was just such a random fate experience. If I hadn't bought that hutch dresser, I never would have gotten into telephones.
Wow. It's interesting. Off camera, we were speaking that you actually did manage to scratch that itch of commercial property, despite the fact that you were an entrepreneur, having bought the property that you were in, and no doubt some other ones along the way as well. So it's I guess, a testament to you can have things that satiate interest as long as you're doing the main thing, the main hustle as well. You have a side hustle is essentially what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Miles, it's been a really insightful conversation, particularly around the structuring of the deal, establishing tension, the mistakes that you made along the way, enterprise versus SMB, taking funding versus not taking funding, the value of external advice, and probably the big one for me is the thought process that you had around pricing, and that when an acquirer came in, they doubled the prices for your customers and you lost almost no customers whatsoever as a consequence. which I think should probably give people a lot of pause for consideration about their pricing structure and how they go about doing things. But Miles, been a really valuable conversation. I thank you very much for coming on today and look forward to keeping in touch.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, it's been good fun.
Great.
Yeah, nice chatting.
Nice one.